Okay, so get this. We're taking a deep dive into the reviews for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the movie that, like, kicked off this whole wizarding world craze, right?
It really did, doesn't it?
And I was looking through all these IMDb reviews, and honestly, it's wild. It's like a box of Birdie Watts, every flavor beans. You got everything from pure cinematic magic to cynical cash grab and everything in between.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's pretty extreme.
It really makes you wonder why this film, of all the films, is sparking such strong feelings.
I know, right? I think what's really fascinating here is we're not just seeing people's opinions on the movie itself, but also on the whole challenge of adapting like a universally beloved book. It's almost like these reviews are giving us this kind of like behind the scenes look at people's expectations for how a story like Harry Potter should make that jump from page to screen.
Yeah, totally. And one thing that just keeps popping up over and over again is this whole debate about staying true to the book. Like, some reviewers are absolutely ecstatic about how accurate it is. They're like, Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid, absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
The Diagon Alley set, mind-blowing. And then, obviously, you've got all those iconic scenes like the Quidditch match and the troll in the bathroom, all brought to life.
Yeah, and you can tell that for a lot of fans, seeing the book's world recreated so faithfully was a huge part of what made this film so appealing. They wanted to see those details that they had, like, pictured in their minds for so long actually come to life on screen. And I think the film really delivers on that. But then it also makes you think, like, is there such a thing as being too faithful?
Yeah, because some reviewers do say that despite all that accuracy, something might have been, like, lost in translation.
Uh-huh.
Like a few mentioned missing the book's deeper emotional moments and kind of that like clever way it pokes fun at those like stuffy British institutions.
Oh, I see. That makes sense. I think what this is showing us is that film and books, they're different beasts, you know? You have to make really difficult choices about what you keep and what you cut. And sometimes those choices, unfortunately, are leaving certain things behind.
Yeah, but then it gets even more interesting because there's one reviewer who actually argues that sticking so closely to the book actually might have made it even more popular.
Oh, really? How so?
Because by like keeping all those core elements the same, it's almost like they were giving the viewers this delicious little appetizer, but it left them craving the full meal. You know,
Right.
they wanted that richer, more in-depth experience you get from reading the actual book. It's almost like a sneaky marketing strategy.
That is pretty clever. I guess, yeah, by capturing those essential elements, the film almost acted like this gateway into the broader world of the books, right? Gave you a taste of the magic, but also made you really crave that full experience. It's a really fascinating example of how a film can actually kind of spark that deeper connection to the source material.
For sure. Okay, speaking of interesting, let's talk Chris Columbus, the director. You know, the guy behind Home Alone, that's his Doubtfire.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, some reviewers were kind of shocked by how restrained his direction was in this film. They were expecting a lot more of that, like, over-the-top physical comedy that he's known for.
Yeah, I guess it was a bit unexpected. I mean, it's interesting. One reviewer even suggested that he might have gone too far in the opposite direction, like sacrificing some emotional impact just to avoid making the film feel too cartoonish.
Oh, interesting. But then you have other reviewers saying that a little bit of exaggeration was definitely needed to, like, bring the humor from the book to life on screen. So it's like, what's the right answer? How much do you stay true to the original and how much do you adjust to make it work?
I mean, I guess that's the million galleon question, right? It really raises the whole issue of artistic freedom. You know, when filmmakers are adapting a book, like how closely should they stick to the original? Do they have the freedom to reinterpret certain things? These reviews definitely show that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It really just comes down to like what each individual viewer values in an adaptation.
Absolutely. Okay, so speaking of choices, can we talk about the casting?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, almost everybody just raves about it, especially the kids.
Really?
Alan Rickman as Snape, perfection. Maggie Smith as McGonagall, Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid, Richard Harris as Dumbledore. They all just absolutely nailed it.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think the casting was a huge success. It really seems like they understood it. It wasn't just about finding talented actors, but it was about finding actors who actually embodied the characters, you know, like they really brought them to life.
But even with all that praise, there's this one dissenting voice that just stood out to me. One reviewer was not impressed with Daniel Radcliffe's performance. They found it like too subdued or something.
Oh, interesting.
It's kind of a reminder that even when an adaptation stays really true to the book, people are still going to have different interpretations.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what one person loves another might find completely boring. It's all subjective, right? Especially with a film like this, which has such a broad audience.
Okay, so let's get a little technical for a minute. The special effects in Sorcerer's Stone.
Okay.
I mean, they got some mixed reactions. Some reviewers, absolute blown away. They're like spectacular. Others thought they were just good, but they didn't quite capture the magic.
Yeah, and I think it's worth remembering that this film came out in 2001, which was a time when CGI was like still kind of finding its feet.
Right.
So what might have seemed groundbreaking back then might not hold up quite as well by today's standards, right?
And one reviewer pointed out something that I thought was super interesting. They thought that the sorting hat scene, which didn't rely as heavily on CGI, was actually the most delightful.
Huh. That is interesting. I wonder if that's because those more practical effects just felt more like tangible, more integrated into the world. Sometimes those simpler effects can actually create a more believable and immersive experience than even like the most advanced CGI.
And talking about immersive, so many reviewers mentioned that Sorcerer's Stone truly transported them to this magical world. There's one review that I love. It just beautifully describes that shared feeling of seeing it in theaters for the first time.
Yeah.
How John Williams' score and all those like iconic images, they just swept everyone away.
Yeah, and that really speaks to, how the film kind of acts as this collective memory for like a whole generation of fans. It's not just about the story itself, but it's about that shared experience of discovering this magical world for the first time and often together in a dark theater. It creates this bond that goes beyond just watching a movie.
Yeah. And it makes me think like some people say a film's not good unless it can stand on its own, separate from the book. But isn't that kind of a cop-out? Especially for something like Sorcerer's Stone that literally launched this entire phenomenon. Shouldn't we consider that impact, too?
Yeah, I think you're right. It really raises this question of whether a film's legacy can be sort of separate from its quality. Like, you can acknowledge a film's cultural importance even if you don't personally love it.
Right.
And in this case, Sorcerer's Stone clearly opened the door to this world that has captivated millions of people. And that in itself is a pretty incredible achievement, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, totally. But of course, it's not all sunshine and butterbeer, right?
Right.
We can't forget about that one super negative review that completely rips the film apart. They called it unimaginative, poorly made, a cynical cash grab they did not hold back.
Oh, wow. They really didn't, did they? It's almost like they took a bezoar to counteract all the positivity. But even harsh critiques like that, I think, can offer some really valuable insights. This particular review, it seems to be coming from a place of deep disappointment. Maybe because the reviewer had like really high expectations or just a really strong connection to the book that the film just couldn't quite live up to.
Yeah. And get this, they hated the Quidditch match.
Ah.
Called it nonsensical and boring. Can you believe that?
Wow. It's funny, how a scene that can work so well in a book can sometimes fall completely flat on screen. Adapting a world this complex and magical, especially one that has like made-up sports with all these complicated rules, it's no easy feat. It shows the challenges of like translating something from one medium to another, and maybe they just don't like Quidditch. But then, to contrast that, we have another review that calls Sorcerer's Stone pure cinematic magic. I mean, talk about two opposite ends of the spectrum. It really shows how subjective it all is, right? What's striking to me is that both extremes, both the love and the hate, seem to stem from a very strong emotional response to the film. Whether it's positive or negative, the film clearly evokes strong feelings. I think that speaks to its power as a storytelling experience.
So where does all of this leave us? We've got people praising the faithfulness, criticizing the direction, debating the special effects, and just like a whole lot of passion on both sides. What do you make of it all?
I think it's safe to say that Sorcerer's Stone is a film that definitely captured the spirit of the book, but it did face some hurdles when it came to bringing certain elements to life on screen. It brought joy to a lot of people, disappointment to others, and it undeniably kicked off this huge cultural phenomenon that we're still seeing today.
It really makes you think about what makes a successful adaptation. Is it just about sticking to the book, or do filmmakers have a little wiggle room to get creative? What do you think?
Well, that's the million galleon question, isn't it? And Honestly, there's no easy answer. It's all about finding that balance, that sweet spot between staying true to the original work and making the most of what film as a medium has to offer.
Yeah, it's a tough one for sure. You want to like honor the book, but also remember that film is its own thing with its own, strengths and limitations.
And in the end, it all comes down to what each person wants out of an adaptation, right? Like some fan, they just want a carbon copy of the book, and others, they're more flexible as long as the main story's there. Yeah, exactly. Like some people might be okay with changes if it means the movie's better, overall. It's so cool seeing all these different takes in the reviews. Like it reminds us there's no one right way to adapt a book, and it'll always come down to what the viewer thinks?
Totally. And speaking of like capturing the magic, I found this one review that just perfectly describes that feeling of seeing the film in theaters for the first time. They talk about John Williams' score and those iconic visuals, and you can practically feel them getting transported back to that moment of like shared awe.
It really is amazing how a film can become this like shared memory for a whole generation. It's not just about the story itself, but about that collective experience of discovering a new world together, often for the first time in a dark theater. It creates this bond that goes beyond just watching a movie.
Totally. It makes me think about how some people are like, a film's not good unless it stands on its own separate from the book. But isn't that kind of a weird standard? Especially with something like Sorcerer's Stone, which literally started this whole thing. Shouldn't we think about its impact too?
I think so. It brings up this question of whether a film's legacy can be bigger than its actual quality. Like you can recognize that a film is culturally important even if you don't personally love it.
Right.
And in this case, Sorcerer's Stone undeniably opened the door to this world that's captivated millions of people. That's got to count for something, right?
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about all the glowing reviews, but let's not forget about that one super negative one that just ripped the film to shreds. They called it unimaginative, purely made, a cynical cash grab, no punches pulled.
It's like they used a bezoar to counteract all the good vibes, but I think even those really harsh reviews can tell us something useful. This review, it seems like it's coming from a place of real disappointment. Maybe they had super high hopes, or they just loved the book so much that the film couldn't possibly compare.
And get this, they absolutely hated the Quidditch match.
What? No way.
Called it nonsensical and boring. How can anyone not love Quidditch?
It is funny how a scene can work perfectly in the book, but then just fall flat on screen. Adapting a world this complex and fantastical, especially one with made-up sports and all these crazy rules, it's a huge challenge. It's a good reminder that what works in one medium doesn't always translate perfectly to another.
It's like they just couldn't let go and enjoy the ride. I remember seeing this in theaters as a kid, and that Quidditch match blew my mind. But watching it now, I can kind of see their point. Some of the effects haven't aged that well, but then you have another review that calls Sorcerer's Stone pure cinematic magic. It's crazy how two people can watch the same film and have completely different experiences.
It really is. What's interesting to me is that both extremes, the love and the hate, both seem to come from a place of strong emotion. Whether it's positive or negative, this film really gets people feeling things. I think that says a lot about its power as a story.
So where does that leave us? We've got people praising the book accuracy, criticizing the director's choices, arguing about the special effects, and just a ton of passion on both sides. What do you think it all means?
It seems like Sorcerer's Stone definitely captured the essence of the book, but maybe struggled a bit when it came to bringing certain elements to life on the big screen. It made some people super happy, disappointed others, and ultimately launched this cultural phenomenon that's still going strong today.
Makes you really think about what goes into making a good adaptation, right? Is it all about following the book to the letter, or can filmmakers take some liberties and get creative? If you were adapting Sorcerer's Stone today, what would you focus on?
Ooh, that's the million-galleon question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. It's this delicate dance between honoring the source material and taking advantage of what film can do.
I guess it all comes down to finding that balance between staying true to the spirit of the book and making choices that work best for the film.
Exactly. It's about making something that feels both familiar and new, something that can stand on its own but still pays tribute to the original.
And as these reviews show, there will always be different opinions on how well an adaptation pulls that off.
That's right. Every viewer comes in with their own expectations and experiences. What works for one person might not work for another.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these Sorcerer's Stone reviews, what's your biggest takeaway?
For me, it's that reminder that adaptations at their best can be both a reflection and a springboard. They can reflect the magic of the original story, but also spark new conversations and inspire new ways of looking at it. And with Sorcerer's Stone, it's clear that the film started this passion for the wizarding world that's still burning bright today.
That's a great way to put it. And for everyone listening out there, I want to pose a question to you. Imagine you're the director, and you're bringing Sorcerer's Stone to life today. What would you keep the same? What would you maybe tweak or change? How would you find that balance between staying true to the book and using all the cool things film can do?
That's a big one, right? It would be such a huge responsibility taking on this story that so many people love and reimagining it for like a new generation.
Yeah, and I mean, today you'd have access to all this incredible technology, but you'd also have the expectations of like millions of fans on your shoulders. No pressure.
It's true, though. It shows how adapting a book isn't just about, like, copying the words onto the screen. It's about capturing the feeling, the themes, the heart of what made it special for people in the first place.
And sometimes that might mean making some choices that are like a little risky, even if it means changing some things from the book.
Exactly. I think the key is understanding that the book and the film, they can both be their own thing, right? Two sides of the same coin. You know what I mean? They can each offer something unique and even build on each other.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these Sorcerer's Stone reviews, what do you think is the most important thing we learned?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that every adaptation is like a conversation. It's this back and forth between the author, the filmmakers, and the audience. And these reviews, they're like little snapshots of that conversation showing us all the different ways people connect with the story, what parts stand out, what parts get people talking.
It's a beautiful way to put it. It reminds us that adaptations aren't just about recreating something we already love. It's about finding those new layers, those fresh perspectives, and maybe even starting some new debates.
Absolutely. And for all you Potter fans out there, I would say keep those wands ready because the conversation never really ends. Every time we revisit these stories, whether it's reading the books or watching the films, we bring a little bit of ourselves to the experience, and that keeps the magic alive.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of Sorcerer's Stone reviews. Thanks for joining us.